a volunteer put a medal around my neck. It was a beautiful, sunny spring day, and I hated that medal. And I hated the event. And I hated the organization that sponsored the event, which, by the way, was called the Non-Competitive Run Walk Event for Survivors. And that's not what I'm calling it. That's what it was called. It was 1 year after I was standing in the bleacher seats when bombs went off across the street from me at the finish line of the Boston Marathon. This was after 1 year of me looking for my story in the news, trying to hear stories about people who'd experienced psychological injuries, who'd walked away without any physical injuries. It was during that year that I was told I could not apply for the privately funded victim compensation fund because I didn't have any physical injuries. But during that year, I experienced anxiety, sleeplessness, and what's called intrusive thoughts. For example, one day I was standing on the subway platform, and when the train entered the station, in my mind, it exploded. And there was fire and smoke and blood and limbs and dead bodies everywhere. And nobody really tells you, what are you supposed to do when your mind takes over like that? I finally found a group for people who'd been at the finish line, a support group. And while I was in that group, we found out that the mayor of my city attended the support group for the people who had the physical injuries, but he never visited our support group. I didn't know I counted as a victim of that crime until a Red Cross volunteer sent me to our Victims Assistance Association, and I discovered I did count as a victim. But it took 6 months to get my FBI interview to prove that I was a victim, because once they finished interviewing all the people with physical injuries, it wasn't a priority to talk to the rest of us. When I finally got approved for that, I had paperwork I had to show. It was the first time I saw the diagnosis from my therapist, post-traumatic stress disorder. About a few weeks after the non-competitive run-walk event for survivors, a friend of mine asked me if I would tell my story at a conference for communicators. And my first thought was, why would anybody want to hear my story? I still have both my legs. I walked away that day. But he insisted, and I said, as long as I don't have to figure out anything, you just tell me what you want me to say and when you want me to show up, and I will do it. So a few months after that, I was standing in a conference room in Providence, Rhode Island, in front of about 40 or 50 people, and a panel of 4 of us telling the story. I had 12 minutes. Afterwards, nobody asked me any questions. They asked the other panelists questions. But it had felt good, a little bit, to be telling my story and have people hear it. And afterwards, a man that I didn't know came up to me, and he said, sometimes tragedy has a way of finding the right person. And because it had felt good to tell my story, I decided I wanted to do more of that. But I didn't know how to make that happen, and nobody was ringing my phone or knocking down my door to ask me to speak. So I found an agent who appreciated my mission and wanted to help me, and she started booking me for conferences. And every time I stood up at a microphone like this and told my story, a little voice in my head said, why would anybody listen to you? Nothing happened to you that day. Just get over it. But I kept going, and I kept going even through getting anonymous feedback after a conference speaking to first responders, where somebody said, I don't know why she was talking to us. She said she suffered, and she wasn't even hurt. Flash forward to 3 years after that first conference in Providence, and I'm standing alone on a stage in Pennsylvania in front of 600 emergency management professionals. 600 people whose whole job is to take care of people like me after something bad happens, after the worst day of their life. And I knew that somewhere in there, somebody heard something that was going to change the life of a future victim of mass violence, because I had been able to stand up on that stage and tell my story. And as I stepped off the stage, the director of the Pennsylvania Emergency Management Agency came up to me and gave me a challenge coin. And I didn't even really know what that was. But I did know that this man, this former Army guy, put a medal in my hand, and that I had earned that medal.